Carl Jung revealed that empaths can uncover their true self by following a psychological roadmap that most people never stumble upon. Not through meditation, therapy, or even years of spiritual searching. Jung discovered that empaths hold a distinct psychological edge when it comes to individuation, but only if they recognize the hidden shadow pattern that keeps them trapped in others' emotional realities. Picture this. You're sitting alone after a long day of absorbing other people's feelings. Your friend's anxiety, a coworker's frustration, your family's silent tension. You feel drained, unsure what emotions are actually yours. You can sense everyone else's inner world with striking accuracy, yet when you try to reach your own, there's only emptiness. Jung spent decades exploring what he termed individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are beneath every mask and projection. But he realized that empaths face a unique struggle. Their greatest gift is also their greatest barrier to self-discovery. Once you grasp Jung's map, you'll stop losing yourself in others' emotions. This isn't another form of spiritual bypassing or false positivity. It's a psychological guide that uncovers the deepest truths of empathic awareness. By the end of this journey, you won't just reclaim your real self. You'll learn to turn your sensitivity into strength rather than a curse. But here's what makes Jung's finding unsettling for empaths. Your ability to feel everyone's emotions isn't purely a blessing. It has been unconsciously training you to abandon your authentic self. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Your empathic nature leads to what can be called emotional fusion, a state where your boundaries become so thin that you lose sight of where you end and others begin. You've been absorbing not just emotions, but fragments of identity from every person around you. Jung understood that empaths experience a distinct version of what he called the persona problem. While most people wear masks to hide their true selves from others, empaths wear them to hide from themselves. Every time you put someone's emotions above your own inner truth, you strengthen a false persona and drift further from what Jung called the self. The real tragedy isn't that you feel too deeply. It's that you were conditioned to think feeling everything makes you more spiritual, evolved, or compassionate. But Jung uncovered a truth that shatters this belief. Genuine compassion arises only from an integrated self, not from a fragmented empath lost in emotional chaos. Jung's first insight into empathic individuation revolves around what might be called the empathic shadow, the parts of yourself you've rejected because they don't align with the identity of the gentle healer. As Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And here lies the shadow most empaths avoid confronting, the need to be needed. Deep within your unconscious, there's a side of you that quietly enjoys being the emotional savior, the one everyone runs to in crisis. This hidden aspect manipulates through martyrdom, controls by caretaking, and sustains superiority through suffering. Though rarely admitted, part of you feels special because you can sense what others cannot, a subtle pride in being the chosen one who absorbs everyone's pain. Jung would name this the wounded healer complex, where your identity becomes so entangled with saving others that you subconsciously create circumstances requiring your emotional rescue. But it gets even darker. Within your empathic shadow lies your rage. Years of suppressed anger over crossed boundaries, ignored needs, and your true self buried beneath others' emotional burdens. You've been taught that anger isn't spiritual, so you forced it into the unconscious, where it festers as passive aggression, victimhood, and what Jung called emotional possession. Jung noted, "The healthy man does not torture others. Generally, it is the tortured who turn into torturers." Your shadow hides the potential to turn empathy into a weapon, to manipulate through guilt, dominate through emotional overwhelm, or punish by withdrawing your healing energy. The most perilous aspect of the empathic shadow is projection. You unconsciously project your suppressed anger onto others, labeling them as toxic or narcissistic, without realizing that the same traits exist within you. You become what Jung described as a shadow hunter, obsessed with spotting darkness in everyone else while remaining blind to your own. If you've ever secretly felt special for being the only one who could truly understand another's pain, you've met this shadow. Comment: I was their chosen healer. Recognizing this doesn't invite shame, it opens the door to integration. Jung taught that when the shadow becomes conscious, it transforms from a source of manipulation into a source of genuine strength. Jung's second key insight shows how empaths become trapped in what can be called the sensitive persona, a false identity built on being emotionally available to everyone but themselves. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." At first glance, Your persona as the compassionate healer appears noble, but in truth, it's a refined defense mechanism. You've learned that being sensitive and self-sacrificing earns affection, approval, and a sense of significance. Yet this very persona forces you to constantly monitor others' emotions while disregarding your own. Jung discovered that the stronger this mask becomes, the deeper your authentic self retreats into hiding. You start living what could be called empathic performance, always scanning for emotional disturbances, instinctively adjusting your energy to calm others, and unconsciously absorbing tension. The painful paradox is that your empathic persona actually cuts you off from real empathy. True empathy thrives on firm boundaries, on knowing where you end and others begin. But your persona breeds what Jung termed emotional fusion, a state where you dissolve into other people's emotions. Here's how the cycle sustains itself. Every time you soothe someone's anxiety or take in their anger, you get a small surge of validation, reinforcing the persona. You begin to equate your worth with your ability to emotionally stabilize others. Jung called this the helper's high, a psychological addiction that keeps you entangled in codependent loops. But this persona comes with a heavy price: the suppression of your own emotional truth. You learn to silence your needs, downplay your pain, and elevate everyone else's feelings above your own. Jung once wrote, "The foundation of all mental illness is the unwillingness to experience legitimate suffering." Your legitimate suffering includes the grief of never being seen for who you truly are, the anger at your boundaries being constantly violated, and the fear of discovering what remains when you're no longer needed. Though the persona shields you from these realities, it also blocks access to your true power. Jung knew that every persona eventually collapses. There comes a breaking point when maintaining the false self becomes unbearable, when the emotional entanglement feels more like confinement than purpose. This collapse isn't a breakdown in the pathological sense. It's your psyche's attempt to restore authenticity. The real question isn't if your empathic persona will fall apart, but whether you'll have the courage to meet your true self when it does. You may already sense that Jung's map for empathic individuation involves what can be called conscious separation, the psychological act of detaching your authentic identity from the emotional fusion you've lived in. Jung wrote, "Individuality is the opposite of belonging to a group, an institution, a race, or a nation." Through this, you begin to tell the difference between your own emotions and those you've absorbed, between true intuition and anxious hyper-awareness, between genuine compassion and codependent caretaking. This process terrifies most empaths because it feels like betraying the very identity they've built their life around. You've likely encountered Jung's 4 stages of empathic individuation on your own path. The first is shadow integration, facing your need to be needed, your resentment over boundary violations, and your hidden sense of superiority in being more sensitive than others. This stage feels like a death, as you dismantle the identity that once gave you meaning and love. The second stage is persona dissolution, consciously releasing the role of the emotional caretaker. Jung described this as the dark night of the soul for empaths, because without the constant drama of others' problems, you must confront the emptiness you've long avoided. You realize you don't truly know who you are without someone to fix. Then comes the third stage, what Jung called active imagination. This is when you begin to converse with your own unconscious instead of processing everyone else's. You start listening to your dreams, tending to your emotional needs, and cultivating what could be called internal empathy, the ability to feel and honor your own inner world. The fourth stage is self-realization, the awakening of what Jung called the transcendent function. This is the point where you gain the ability to feel deeply without dissolving into others' emotions, to help without self-abandonment, to remain sensitive without being porous. You've probably sensed Jung's warning that individuation is not a straight path. He wrote, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown." You don't fix your empathic struggles. You evolve beyond them, creating a larger inner vessel that can hold both your sensitivity and your sovereignty. If you've begun setting boundaries and others labeled you selfish, that's a sign of growth. You chose yourself for the first time. True wisdom understands that empathic individuation demands what Jung called holding the tension of opposites, learning to be both open and protected, compassionate yet self-preserving, sensitive yet strong. This isn't about becoming less empathic. It's about transforming into a conscious empath instead of an unconscious emotional sponge. Jung's most profound revelation about empaths lies in their link to what he termed the collective unconscious, the shared psychological inheritance of humanity. He wrote, The dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul. Your empathic sensitivity doesn't merely tune into individual emotions. It taps into archetypal energies, the universal emotional patterns embedded in all human experience. This is what can be called archetypal empathy. It explains why you might feel overwhelmed in crowds, why certain people instantly trigger deep reactions, or why you can sense truths about others they never voice. Jung found that empaths often channel archetypal energies like the mother, the warrior, the victim, or the savior. When someone around you activates the victim archetype, your unconscious may automatically summon the savior archetype. You believe you're acting out of compassion, but in reality, you're being possessed by an archetypal force. This archetypal possession is what makes empathic reactions feel so uncontrollable. You're not deliberately absorbing someone's anxiety. You're unconsciously resonating with the collective anxiety they represent. Jung called this participation mystique, a psychological state where individual awareness dissolves into collective emotional fields. But here lies Jung's radical insight. Your sensitivity doesn't have to trap you, it can liberate you. When you learn to work consciously with archetypal energies rather than be ruled by them, your empathy becomes sacred empathy, the power to support others without losing yourself. Jung taught that dreams are the main channel through which the collective unconscious speaks to individual awareness. For empaths, dreams often reveal how to protect their authenticity while honoring their sensitivity. Notice dreams where you set boundaries, say no, or defend yourself. These are messages from your individuating psyche guiding you toward balance. The collective unconscious also communicates through synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that nudge you towards self-integration. As you start setting boundaries, you may notice emotionally healthier people entering your life. When you begin prioritizing your own needs, opportunities may arise that align with your true expression. Jung wrote, "Man's task is to become conscious of the contents that press upward from the unconscious." For empaths, that means becoming aware of which archetypal roles you unconsciously carry for others. Are you possessed by the mother archetype, compulsively nurturing everyone? Are you living through the wounded healer, staying in pain so you can guide others through theirs? If you've started noticing repeating emotional patterns in your relationships, you might say, "I see the pattern now." The goal isn't to suppress these archetypal forces, it's to interact with them consciously. Jung called this active imagination, engaging in dialogue with archetypal energies rather than being consumed by them. Jung's ultimate challenge for empathic individuation is what might be called the integration challenge, the ability to preserve your authentic self while remaining genuinely empathic. As he wrote, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life." Integration doesn't mean dulling your sensitivity. It means cultivating what Jung described as conscious empathy instead of unconscious absorption. Conscious empathy allows you to feel another's pain without taking it on as your own, to offer care without sacrificing your inner stability. You said. The integration test unfolds in 3 essential phases. The first is boundary consciousness, the ability to tell, in real time, which emotions are truly yours and which you've unconsciously absorbed. This develops into what can be called emotional sovereignty, the power to recognize this feeling belongs to someone else, and consciously return it, without guilt, shame, or drama. Jung found that integrated empaths embody what he termed the transcendent function, the capacity to hold opposites in creative balance. You can be both open and protected, caring and detached, vulnerable and strong. This isn't coldness or emotional withdrawal, it's authentic presence without self-loss. The second phase is authentic response, learning to act from your true self instead of reflexively from empathic conditioning. Rather than automatically trying to fix or soothe others, you cultivate the courage to let people experience their own emotions. Jung described this as loving detachment, to care deeply without assuming responsibility for another's healing. This phase is frightening for many empaths because they've been conditioned to believe that not absorbing someone's pain equals indifference. Yet Jung taught that taking on another's emotions actually hinders their growth. It replaces true healing with emotional dependency. The third phase is sacred service, serving others from inner wholeness rather than from unresolved wounds. Jung wrote, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity." When you serve from authenticity instead of compulsion, your gifts become transformative. Integrated empaths embody what can be called witnessing presence. the ability to hold space for others' emotions without internalizing them, to offer guidance without attachment to results, to love without self-erasure. That's the difference between being an emotional sponge and being a lighthouse. Jung understood that real empathy requires self-possession. You can't offer what you don't embody, and you can't hold space for others if you aren't holding space for yourself. The integration process teaches that self-care is sacred, not selfish. It's the root of genuine empathy. The ultimate test of integration is whether you can stay centered amid others' emotional storms, able to support without self-abandonment, to be present without disappearing into others' pain. If you've learned to feel someone's suffering without taking it on, you can affirm, "I witness but don't absorb." Jung's individuation map becomes practical through what can be called empathic alchemy, the conscious transformation of sensitivity from burden into superpower. He wrote, "We don't really heal anything. We simply let it go." The first practice is emotional sorting, identifying which emotions are authentically yours and which are absorbed. Each morning, scan your emotional field and ask, "What am I feeling that's truly mine?" You'll be surprised by how much of your emotional load belongs to others. Jung emphasized that awareness begins with observation. Keep what can be called an empathy journal. Track your emotional shifts through the day, noting who drains or uplifts you, what environments overwhelm you, and what triggers emotional absorption. Over time, you'll uncover patterns revealing your unconscious empathic programming. The second practice is boundary rituals, physical and energetic techniques that help sustain emotional sovereignty. Jung recognized that the body stores psychological patterns, so somatic practices are vital for individuation. Try visualizations where you imagine a protective energy field around yourself, or movements that help release absorbed tension. Establish empathic transitions, conscious mini-rituals between interactions that clear residual energy and reconnect you to your authentic center. This could mean washing your hands while picturing the release of others' emotions, or taking 3 deep, grounding breaths before your next encounter. The third practice is authentic expression, honoring your own emotional truth instead of constantly deferring to others. Jung wrote, "To be normal is the ultimate aim of the unsuccessful." Your empathic depth makes you abnormal in the most vital way, but only when you embrace your uniqueness rather than conforming to expectations. Start small. Express preferences you've silenced. Decline social plans when you're depleted, without lengthy justification. If someone's presence feels draining, step back without guilt. Jung referred to this as ethical egoism, caring for yourself not out of selfishness, but because your well-being strengthens the collective good. The fourth practice is shadow work, facing, not fleeing, the disowned parts of yourself. Jung taught that integration comes from befriending the shadow, not eradicating it. Acknowledge your hidden need to be needed, your resentment over violated boundaries, and the subtle superiority you may feel for being more evolved or more aware than others. Comment if you've begun expressing your needs without apology. My voice matters, too. Jung recognized that applying the principles of individuation must be a gentle and gradual process. You're essentially reprogramming decades of empathic conditioning, which demands patience and self-compassion. The goal isn't perfection. It's cultivating conscious choice in how you engage with your empathic abilities. Jung's shadow work reveals what I refer to as the dark empath, the unconscious ways your sensitivity can turn destructive when it remains unintegrated. Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul." Here lies the shadow truth that most empaths hesitate to confront. Your emotional absorption can transform into a kind of psychological vampirism. When you're constantly processing other people's emotions, you're unconsciously feeding off their psychological energy. Emotional drama becomes addictive because it provides a sense of meaning and vitality. Jung identified this pattern as emotional possession, when individual consciousness is lost and one becomes engulfed by collective emotional states. You may begin unconsciously attracting or creating emotional crises because without them, life feels hollow and purposeless. Your identity grows so dependent on being needed that you end up sabotaging your own happiness to preserve the role of the wounded healer. The dark empath also wields sensitivity as a weapon, manipulating through emotional intensity, controlling through victimhood, or punishing by withdrawing your healing presence. Jung called this psychological poisoning, where the unintegrated shadow contaminates one's empathic gifts. You may unconsciously amplify your emotions for attention, dramatize your sensitivity to escape accountability, or use your empathic insights to subtly influence others' behavior. The shadow empath becomes what Jung described as a false prophet, someone who appears to serve healing while actually sustaining dysfunction. Yet the darkest aspect of unintegrated empathy is projection. You unconsciously project your disowned selfishness onto others, labeling them narcissistic while failing to see your own narcissistic need to be the special healer. You become fixated on identifying toxic people, remaining blind to your own toxic tendencies. Jung taught that shadow projection always involves the inferior function, the psychological capacities least developed in oneself. For many empaths, these include healthy aggression, balanced selfishness, and the ability to uphold boundaries without guilt. You project these disowned traits onto others and then attempt to heal them, an unconscious effort to integrate your own shadow. Healing begins the moment you acknowledge that your empathic nature can be harmful when it operates unconsciously. Jung wrote, "The most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a sense of security and calm that is not easily disturbed." Integration means owning your potential for manipulation, your addiction to emotional intensity, and your hidden superiority complex. This isn't about shame, it's about recognizing automatic patterns that emerge without awareness. Jung found that once the shadow is integrated, it becomes a wellspring of authentic strength. Within your dark empath shadow lies your ability to maintain healthy boundaries, practice rightful selfishness, and say no without guilt. Jung's deepest insight into empathic individuation centers on what I call the empathic mirror, the realization that every person you feel compelled to heal reflects a fragment of your own psyche. Jung wrote, "Everyone you meet knows something you don't know but need to know. Learn from them." This mirror dynamic operates through what Jung termed projection and introjection, unconscious exchanges where you cast away your disowned traits onto others and, in turn, absorb their projected material. Each person you're drawn to heal embodies an aspect of your own shadow or untapped potential. The wounded soul that triggers your rescuing instinct may reflect your own unhealed pain, while the angry individual who stirs your peacekeeping urges may carry the suppressed rage you've long denied. The narcissistic person who drains your empathy may actually be revealing your own repressed longing for attention and validation. Jung taught that empaths are instinctively attracted to those who carry fragments of their projected shadow. You become obsessed with healing others because, at a deeper level, you're attempting to mend the disowned parts of yourself. This is why empathic relationships so often slip into codependence. You need others to embody your unintegrated psychological material, and they, in turn, need you to absorb their emotional overflow. But here's Jung's transformative insight. Once you become aware of the mirror effect, every relationship turns into an opportunity for individuation. Instead of rushing to fix others, you can ask, what part of myself is this person reflecting? Which rejected quality are they holding for me? What unlived potential are they revealing? This perspective shifts empathy from unconscious absorption to conscious reflection. You begin to realize that your compulsion to heal others is actually your psyche's way of integrating its own fragmented aspects. Jung called this active imagination, engaging relationships as mirrors for self-discovery rather than as projects for repair. The mirror effect also clarifies why some people evoke inexplicable emotional reactions in you. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The needy person who drains your energy may reflect your own disowned dependency. The angry individual who intimidates you may embody the rage you've long suppressed. Integration begins when you stop trying to transform others and instead ask what their behavior is revealing about your inner world. This doesn't mean turning inward to the point of self-absorption or losing your empathy. It means channeling your sensitivity towards self-awareness rather than self-erasure. Jung observed that conscious empaths cultivate what he termed psychological reciprocity, the ability to give and receive healing at the same time. When you integrate your projected shadow material, you naturally assist others in doing the same, not through emotional absorption or rescuing, but through grounded presence and authentic wholeness. Jung's vision of the individuated empath points to what I call the conscious sensitive, someone who unites empathic sensitivity with a stable, authentic self. Jung wrote, "The difference between a good life and a bad life is how well you walk through the fire." A conscious empath no longer dissolves into others' emotions. You develop what Jung described as psychological sovereignty, the ability to feel deeply without being overwhelmed, to care deeply without being consumed, to offer help without being depleted. This transformation isn't about dulling your sensitivity but about awakening it consciously. Conscious empaths embody what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposites in creative balance. You can be both tender and strong, open yet protected, compassionate yet discerning. You no longer see these dualities as contradictions, but as harmonized elements of integrated empathy. Jung emphasized that individuation doesn't eliminate your empathic nature, it refines it. You cultivate what I call sacred discernment, the ability to differentiate between true intuition and anxious vigilance, between authentic compassion and codependent caretaking. The conscious empath serves from wholeness, not from wounding. Jung wrote, "Where love reigns, there is no will to power. And where the will to power is paramount, love is lacking." Your acts of service then flow from authenticity, not from a desperate need to earn love or validation through fixing others. You develop what Jung referred to as witnessing consciousness, the ability to hold compassionate space for another's experience without absorbing it. You can feel another's pain without making it your responsibility, and offer support without clinging to the outcome. Love without losing yourself in another's psychological material. This awareness transforms your relationships from codependent fusion into what Jung called conscious partnership. You naturally draw people who don't require you to carry their emotional burdens, and you no longer need others to validate your worth through their healing journey. The individuated empath becomes what Jung envisioned as a bridge between worlds, someone who can navigate both emotional depth and practical reality, blending spiritual sensitivity with psychological maturity, individual authenticity with collective service. Jung recognized that conscious empaths become natural leaders, not through domination, but through integration. Your authentic presence gives others permission to be themselves. Your boundaries teach healthy relationship dynamics. Your self-care demonstrates how to honor sensitivity without martyrdom. The ultimate aim of Jung's empathic individuation isn't to diminish sensitivity. It's to become what I call consciously empathic. Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Integration unfolds through what Jung termed the transcendent function, moments when opposing forces within your psyche synthesize into a higher unity. For empaths, this means harmonizing your drive to help others with your need to honor yourself, and your capacity for deep feeling with your requirement for emotional boundaries. Jung emphasized that transformation occurs in spirals rather than linear progression. You will repeatedly encounter familiar patterns: the urge to absorb others' pain, the compulsion to fix everyone's problems, the guilt around setting boundaries, but each recurrence brings deeper consciousness. The integrated empath develops what I call emotional alchemy, the ability to convert absorbed emotional energy into conscious wisdom. Instead of being consumed by others' feelings, you learn to witness, understand their message, and respond from your authentic center rather than reactive empathy. This process requires what Jung described as psychological death and rebirth. Your former identity, as the wounded healer, the emotional sponge, the perpetual caretaker, must dissolve for your authentic empathic self to emerge. This can feel frightening because you are releasing the persona that previously earned you love and purpose. Yet, Jung discovered that beyond this psychological death lies the birth of the self. Your authentic empathic nature liberated from unconscious programming and codependent patterns. You evolve into someone who serves from strength rather than neediness, who heals from wholeness rather than woundedness. Transformation is complete when empathy becomes a conscious choice rather than an automatic compulsion. You can feel others' emotions without taking them on, offer support without abandoning yourself, and set boundaries without guilt or drama. Jung described individuated empaths as wounded healers who have been healed, those able to guide others through emotional challenges because they have successfully navigated their own. Your sensitivity becomes a gift you share with the world from a place of wholeness, not a burden carried for others. Comment below. I choose conscious empathy if you're ready to transform your sensitivity into a superpower.